The committee will come to order. The Oversight Committee exists to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers. It is our job to work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is our mission, and today's hearing follows one of the most important parts of that mission. With $1.5 billion spent by the Secret Service, nearly $1 billion of that spent on protection of the first family, the second family, former presidents, and presidential candidates, the United States Secret Service was always considered to be the elite law enforcement agency made up of men and women who were highly regarded, highly respected, and highly trusted. The country has placed great faith and trust in the Secret Service. The agents of the Uniform Division, their officers, and the Secret Service agents have a monumental task, that of protecting the nation's presidents, past, present, and future. They do so honorably and not without considerable personal sacrifice. They ensure the safety of the first and second family, yes, and the safety of foreign dignitaries throughout Washington and at times around the world. They ensure the safety of every man and woman who enters the White House and accompanying buildings. But a history of misbehavior, security failures, has clearly blemished that record. On September 19th, Omar Gonzalez jumped the north fence, ran across the White House lawn, up the steps of the North Protocol, and into the front door of the White House. He was armed with a 3-inch serrated knife. He entered through an unlocked door, past the staircase to the presidential residence, and into the East Room of the White House. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the part of my opening statement that was changed last night when the early false report that, in fact, he had been apprehended just inside the front door was turned upside down by a revelation that, in fact, he penetrated much further into the White House. Secret Service officers only subdued him after he was clearly well inside the White House. An intruder walked in the front door of the White House, and that is unacceptable. Common sense tells us that there were a series of security failures, not an instance of praiseworthy restraint. Inexplicably, Omar Gonzalez breached at least 5 rings of security on September 19th. The White House is supposed to be one of America's most secure facilities, and in fact, one of the world's most secure facilities. So how on earth did it happen? This failure was once again has tested the trust of the American people in the Secret Service, a trust we clearly depend on to protect the President. After allowing a paparazzi-crazed reality TV star to crash a state dinner, after engaging prostitutes in Cartagena, after excessive drinking and an agent falling asleep outside his room in the Netherlands, and yes, after the mishandling of the 11/11/11 event, a gunman who sprayed bullets across the White House and it is reported caused over $100,000 in damage that was not properly reported in real time or understood in real time, it is understandable that morale at the agency appears to be in decline, according to news reports. In light of the recent break-in, we have to ask whether the culture at the Secret Service and possible declining morale have an impact in operation, and those are some of our questions today. The appointment of Director Pearson brought new hope that the agency would reclaim its noble image. But recent events have so troubled us that, in fact, we have called the Director here to face some tough questions. How could Mr. Gonzales scale the fence? We understand that. That happens often. People try to scale that fence. But how is it that, as would ordinarily happen, agents didn't immediately apprehend him? How was he able to sprint 70 yards, almost the entire length of a football field, without being intercepted by guards inside the fence? Why didn't security dogs stop him in his tracks? What about the SWAT team and assault rifles or sniper rifles? Why was there no guard stationed at the front door of the White House? And yes, how much would it cost to lock the front door of the White House? The Secret Service must show us how there is a clear path back to public trust. The purpose of today's hearing is to gain answers to these many questions plaguing the Secret Service. Today we will hear from experts on both the agency's protocol, foreign and domestic. But most importantly, we will hear from the Secret Service Director herself on her plans to improve the agency's performance. Americans face real danger as we serve interests abroad, especially those stationed at our embassies. It is a time of great peril. We are engaged in a battle against ISIL as we speak. But that is not limited to foreign soil. Americans know that the next attempt to take the White House may not be by a crazed, solo, knife-wielding veteran with PTSD. It could well be a planned attack from a terrorist organization. The fact is, the system broke down on September 19, as it did when the Salahis crashed the state dinner in 2009, as it did when Ortega Hernandez successfully shot the White House on November 11, 2011, as it did in Cartagena when agents paid for prostitutes and compromised security, as it did in the Netherlands in 2014. We cannot further allow this. But more importantly, as I said to the Director before today's hearing, the Secret Service relies on two important skills, or facts. Their skill, their capability to protect the President must be at the highest level, because they cannot succeed 99%, because 1% failure is not an option. But they also rely on a good faith belief by most people that they shouldn't even try, that this is the hardest target on earth. We need to make sure that that second hardest target on earth is true again, both in reality and in the minds of anyone who might take on the Secret Service to get to the President of the First Family. And with that, I recognize the Ranking Member for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We begin today's hearing with an obvious premise. No individual should be allowed to scale the fence of the White House, sprint across the North Lawn, and burst into the residence of the First Family with a weapon. No one. Our goal today is also clear: to determine how this happened and make sure it never happens again. This is our watch. This recent incident, unfortunately, causes many people to ask whether there is a much broader problem with the Secret Service. Last night, the Washington Post reported that Omar Gonzales made his way into the East Room, much further than the Secret Service previously disclosed. Another report in this weekend's Post about a shooting incident in 2011 raises even more questions about the competency and culture of this elite agency. What concerns me most about this report is that agents said they were hesitant. Agents in this agency said they were hesitant to raise security concerns with their supervisors. Ladies and gentlemen, something is awfully wrong with that picture. The Secret Service is supposed to be the most elite protective force in the world. Yet 4 days went by before they discovered that the White House had been shot 7 times. Then in 2012, there was the prostitution scandal in Colombia. Although it had little to do with tactical protection issues, it seriously damaged the agency's credibility. The Secret Service must not only carry out its duties with the highest degree of excellence and effectiveness, but it also must maintain a reputation which matches that performance. As the Chairman has said, much of what deters people from trying to pierce the protective veil of the Secret Service is the reputation. And that reputation must be one of excellence and effectiveness. Today's witness, Ms. Julia Pearson, was appointed as the Director of the Secret Service last year to help restore the agency's standing. She has had a distinguished 30-year career with the agency. And to her credit, she immediately ordered an internal review and agreed to testify. With respect to the most recent incident, I have key questions for the Director that I know are shared by many people across the country. Did the Secret Service have specific protocols for handling this type of perimeter breach? If so, were those protocols followed in this case? And if they were followed, do they need to be changed in light of what happened? If the protocols were not followed, why were they not followed? And how can we have confidence that they will be followed in the future? I also want to understand what happened prior to the incident. Gonzalez was arrested in Virginia 2 months earlier on July 19th. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record an inventory sheet that was provided to us by the Virginia State Police. It lists the contents of this car, which included an arsenal of 11 firearms, including sniper rifles and a sawed-off shotgun. It also—
Without objection, the entire report will be placed in the record.
Thank you very much. It also included the contents of his car, which included a small arsenal of 11 firearms, including sniper rifles and a sawed-off shotgun. It also included a map of Washington, D.C. with, and I quote, a line drawn to the White House. According to the Virginia State Police, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives concluded that there was no information in Gonzalez's history that prohibited him from owning these firearms. Yet, he was severely mentally ill, and a military psychiatrist reportedly treated him for post-traumatic stress disorder and paranoid schizophrenia. Mr. Chairman, I hate to even imagine what could have happened if Gonzalez had been carrying a gun instead of a knife when he burst inside the White House. That possibility is extremely unsettling. Today, our work faces 2 challenges. First, the Secret Service has not yet completed its internal review. I understand that the Director will provide us with a status update, but the final results are not yet in. Second, some of the information is classified, so we cannot discuss it in public. The very last thing we want to do is give people like Gonzalez a roadmap for how to attack the President or other officials protected by the Secret Service. This does not mean the committee cannot obtain the information. The Director sent a letter on Friday offering not only to testify here today in the public setting, but also to provide all of us with a classified briefing. The Chairman has now agreed to hold this classified session in a separate room directly after this hearing concludes. Let me close by making this very final point. This, ladies and gentlemen, is not a Democratic issue. This is not a Republican issue. This is an American issue. This is also an issue of national security. The vast majority of men who serve and women who serve in the Secret Service are dedicated, experienced public servants who are willing to lay down their lives for their country. And on behalf of a grateful Congress and a grateful nation, I thank every one of them. They have an extremely difficult job, and like others in similar positions, they are required to make instant life or death decisions in extremely stressful situations. Last year, for example, the Capitol Police shot and killed an unarmed woman with a 1-year-old girl in the back seat of her car. Some praised their quick responses, others criticized their actions. But they acted based upon their firsthand experience right here in the Capitol when another deranged individual burst through the doors and killed 2 Capitol Police officers. The Secret Service has a high-profile job, but it is critically important, and it requires accountability so that the spotlight is rightly on their actions today. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to the testimony. I thank you for bringing us back for this hearing, and I look forward to the questions that I've already raised and others being answered. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. I now recognize the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, the Subcommittee Chairman on National Security, for his opening statement.
I thank the Chairman, and I also thank the Ranking Member, Mr. Cummings, in his statement. He's absolutely right. This is not a Republican issue, a Democrat issue. This is an American issue. I don't want it to be the political football, but we in the United States of America are self-critical. It's one of the beauties of our nation is we do hold ourselves accountable, and so I appreciate, Chairman, you holding this hearing. We have wonderful men and women who serve this nation. They do it patriotically. They do it. They put their lives in line. They walk away from their families and their spouses. They don't know what the day is going to bring them, and they do so in a very, very honorable way, and we thank them for their service and their dedication. But I have serious concerns about the current leadership. I have concerns about training, and I have concerns about protocol, and that's what I want to get at today. Since the current director has taken on this role, it's also important to note that she was the Chief of Staff since 2008. And so over the last several years, it's not good enough to just simply excuse this as something we were trying to clean up before because she was the Chief of Staff starting in 2008. I'm concerned about her leadership and the mixed messages that are sent to those that serve in the Secret Service. For instance, after the fence jumping incident, the Secret Service was very quick to put out a statement that honored the officers and agents for their, quote, tremendous restraint. Tremendous restraint is not what we're looking for. Tremendous restraint is not the goal and the objective. It sends a very mixed message. The message should be overwhelming force. If one person can hop that wall, hop that fence, and run unimpeded all the way into an open door at the White House, don't praise them for tremendous restraint. That's not the goal. That's not what we're looking for. If there were alarms that were inside the door that were muted or silenced, I want to know why that is. Who makes that call and decision? That, to me, is a leadership decision. I think at some point we need to go back and review the 2013 Inspector General's report, which actually said there's not a problem here, but has over 1,000 indications of security concerns. In the opening statement, say we have to be 100% right all the time. Everybody agrees with that. And yet the Inspector General's report is pretty damning when it comes and looks at what the agents are feeling like happens within the agency itself. Very concerned about the 2011 incident. I'm thankful for the Washington Post and Carol Leonnig and what she did in the reporting there. As best I can tell from the spot report as well as the article in the Washington Post, the event in 2011 where 8 shots were fired at the White House, you had no less than 5 Secret Service agents report that they thought they heard shots fired. You had somebody on Twitter report that they saw somebody shoot at the White House. There were 2 people in 2 different shuttle vans who reported that they saw somebody firing a weapon at the White House. Blocks away, moments later, somebody crashes a vehicle, an assault rifle is in there, and yet the Secret Service is on the scene, and nobody ties those 2 together. I don't understand that. Later, the Arlington County Police actually detained this person. He had been positively identified based on that vehicle was there, but nobody put it into the system to put him on the watch list. Consequently, when the Arlington County Police pull him over, they take his picture and they let him go. And it was only the Pennsylvania police 5 days later that actually find this person. Now he's serving some 25 years in jail, but he could have done a lot more damage. If the director is truly going to take full responsibility, I think your opening statement and the goals you have should also talk about leadership. Because as I talk to the whistleblowers at the Secret Service and others, they're concerned about leadership. I'm also concerned about training. As I look at the 2015 budget request from the White House, on page 39, there's a basic class totals. And I want to run through these numbers because it's important on the training aspect. Under special agent basic classes, in 2009 there were 8 classes. In 2010 there were 8 classes. In 2011 there were 5 classes. 2012 there were no classes. In 2013 there was 1 class. In the Uniform Division basic class, 2009, 11. 2010 there were 11 classes. 2010, 11 classes. In 2011 there were 6 classes. Then in 2012 there was 1 class. 2013, 1 class. And you look at the budget line appropriation for this, it didn't go down. It's maintained basically the same. Why did that training diminish? And then finally, Mr. Chairman, I worry about protocol. Again, I mentioned tremendous restraint is what the Secret Service touted. That's not the objective. If you project weakness, it invites attacks. We want to see overwhelming force. If a would-be intruder cannot be stopped by a dog or intercepted by a person, perhaps more lethal force is necessary, and I want those Secret Service agents and officers to know at least this member of Congress has their back. Don't let somebody get close to the President. Don't let somebody get close to his family. Don't let them get in the White House, ever. And if they have to take action that's lethal, I will have their back. In this day and age of ISIL and terrorists and IEDs and dirty bombs, we don't know what's going on underneath that person's clothing. If they want to penetrate that, they need to know that they are going to perhaps be killed. That's the message we should be sending every single time. And that's the kind of Secret Service that I expect. I thank them again for their service, their dedication. We love them, we care for them, but we need better leadership. It's not happening. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hearing. My respect for the Secret Service goes back to when I was growing up as a child in the District of Columbia and continues profoundly to this very day. But today we must ask, recent events call for, and recent unprecedented events call for an unprecedented response. First, an increasing number of White House jumpers, including the most recent this month, who was able to get deep into the interior of the White House. Before that, in 2011, multiple shots into the living quarters of the first family, discovered only 4 days later, not by Secret Service investigation, but by White House staff. Beyond these failures in the core mission of the Secret Service to protect the White House and the first family is an unsettling failure to disclose, perhaps even understand what has occurred, or to promptly investigate. Together, this combination of failures suggests strongly that the time is ripe for a 21st century makeover of the Secret Service. I do not regard this matter as a mere question of personnel. I believe it goes far deeper than that. Moreover, the stunning events have occurred during a period when the United States, and by definition the White House and even the President, are being targeted by domestic and international terrorists. According to threat assessments, this President has had 3 times as many threats as his predecessors. Just as troubling have been indications of unwarranted secrecy in the Secret Service. The Secret Service is not a secret society. If there is a willing avoidance of needed transparency, that in itself poses a danger to the White House. For example, when noise is heard that some believe could be gunfire at the White House, others believe is automobile backfire, and still others believe is gang gunfire. Isn't it the job of the Secret Service to presume such a sound is gunfire until an immediate investigation shows it was not? When line officers close to the sound have to become whistleblowers, has active suppression of information become yet another threat to the White House? Worse, do such failures show that some in the Secret Service are in denial of danger, perhaps posing the greatest risk to the White House? Particularly troubling, in light of such unanswered questions, would be the rush to quick fixes, such as suppression of public access to the area around the White House without a thorough investigation. The White House and Lafayette Park, just like the Congress, are First Amendment areas, and the public must be allowed to express their grievances as they always have been. In light of the seriousness of recent breaches, the investigation at the first instance by the Department of Homeland Security should go well beyond the details of these events. They are merely the most recent raw data for a top-to-bottom investigation of Secret Service operations at the White House. This is not a mere question of personnel. Changing people at the top or in between will not solve the issue I think we are presented. We must learn whether today's Secret Service, as structured, for example, could stop 5 or 6 fence jumpers jumping at the same time, intent on harm to the White House and the President, not just a demented war vet who even alone might have succeeded. No scenario should be off the table for the needed 21st century study of Secret Service operations in the age of terrorism. Director Pearson has shown accomplishments in her 18 months as director. The heroism of the Secret Service is beyond debate. The White House intruder was brought down, after all, by an agent. But the White House and the President have been thrust into a new era of danger. The Secret Service should welcome an outside investigation to assure that the necessary resources and the expert backup and the structure for the 21st century is necessary for it to do its job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. Members may have 7 days to submit opening statements for the records. I now ask unanimous consent that our colleague, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, be allowed to participate in today's hearing without objection. So ordered. Additionally, I ask unanimous consent that our colleague, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long, be allowed to participate in today's hearing without objection. So ordered. We now welcome our panel of witnesses. The Honorable Julia Pearson is the Director of the United States Secret Service. The Honorable Ralph Basham is the former Director of the United States Secret Service and currently a partner at Command Consulting Group. The Honorable Todd Keel is the former Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Protection at the United States Department of Homeland Security and is currently a Senior Advisor to Touchstone Page. Pursuant to the committee's rules, I would ask that you please all rise and raise your right hand to take the oath. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow sufficient time for discussion and questions, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire opening statement will be made a permanent part of the record. And with that, Director Pearson is recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, distinguished members of the committee. I'm here today to address the concern that we all share following the incident of September 19th at the White House. It's clear that our security plan was not properly executed. This is unacceptable, and I take full responsibility, and I will make sure that it does not happen again. As Director, my primary concern is ensuring the operational readiness of my workforce. I have been aggressive in addressing our human capital challenges, ensuring professionalism, and developing leaders. Through active engagement with the agency's supervisors and employees, I have made it clear my expectations for professionalism and personal accountability. Much of what we do to protect the President and the White House involves information that is highly sensitive or classified, so I'll be limited in what I can say in a public hearing. On September 19th, a man scaled the north fence of the White House, crossed the lawn while ignoring verbal commands from Uniform Division officers, entered through the front door, and was subsequently arrested on the State floor. Immediately that night, I ordered enhancements around the complex and, in consultation with the Secretary, initiated a comprehensive review of the incident and protective measures to ensure this will not happen again. The review began with a physical assessment of the site and personnel interviews. All decisions made that evening are being evaluated, including those on tactics and use of force in light of the totality of the circumstances confronting those officers. I am committed to the following: a complete and thorough investigations of the facts of this incident, a complete and thorough review of all policies, procedures, protocols in place that govern the security of the White House complex and a response to this incident, and based on the results of that review, a coordinated, informed effort to make any and all adjustments to include training and personnel actions that are necessary to properly ensure the safety and security of the President and the First Family and the White House. The White House emergency action plans are multifaceted and tailored to each threat. The Secret Service has apprehended 16 individuals who have jumped the fence over the last 5 years, including 6 this year alone. In fact, on September 11, 2014, a week prior to the events that are the subject of today's hearing, officers apprehended an individual seconds after he scaled the fence and ran onto the grounds. In addition to fence jumpers, over the last 5 years, hundreds of individuals have approached the White House perimeter, verbalizing threats to our protectees or acting in a suspicious manner. Officers and agents routinely leverage their experience and training to make decisions to either arrest or transfer these individuals to appropriate facilities for mental health evaluations. Protecting the White House complex is a challenge in any threat environment. In addition to being a national icon, the complex consists of public spaces, executive offices where our nation's highest leaders congregate, and the private residence of the President and First Family. Ensuring the safety of all who live and work in the White House while preserving access to the millions of visitors each year requires a unique balance. In this environment, we are never satisfied by the status quo, and we're constantly reviewing our security protocols. With the help of Congress, we have enhanced our protective countermeasures and security features at the White House. In the past 5 years, the Secret Service has upgraded perimeter cameras, officer booths, vehicle gates, and command and control systems, along with enhancements to highly classified programs that have made the President and the complex more secure. We have generated many of these new security enhancements in direct response to intelligence information on known and emerging terrorist tactics. I thank the Congress for their support in this time of constrained resources. Beyond technology, approximately 75% of our annual budget is dedicated to payroll costs, which support our most valuable asset, our people. The agency relies heavily on experience, training, and judgment of our men and women to make critical split-second decisions. With respect to the many questions that have been raised and the opinions proffered in the wake of the September 19th incident, I do not want to get ahead of the investigation that is underway. The Secret Service has had its share of challenges in recent years, and some during my tenure. I intend to lead the Secret Service through these challenges and restore our agency's reputation to the level of excellence that the American public expects. As Director, I'm proud of the Secret Service's workforce who serve each day with honor and distinction. Last week, our employees successfully implemented security operations in conjunction with the 69th United Nations General Assembly in New York City, where they protected the President and more than 140 world leaders. Over the last 12 months, they have completed over 5,600 successful protective missions. It is my responsibility to ensure that these men and women have the resources and training that they need to succeed. As Director, I have worked with the Department of Homeland Security, the Secretary Johnson, the Administration, and Congress to include members of this committee to develop a comprehensive, forward-leaning strategy to further enhance the Secret Service's workforce and operational capabilities. We remain dedicated and committed to protecting the President, the First Family, and the sanctity of the White House. I thank the committee today for the opportunity to appear, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Basham.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings.
Could you turn the mic on and pull it a little closer, please? Try that.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Ranking Member Cummings, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share my perspective today on the recent events at the White House and more broadly on the state of an agency I care a great deal about, the United States Secret Service. Let me say at the outset that I look forward to discussing how the recent incident highlights some of the challenges the Secret Service has long faced at the White House complex in balancing desired levels of security along with the functional needs of those who work and live in that complex, the practical realities of the thriving city it resides within, and the historic symbolism and imagery of the People's House. The incident exposes certain steps the Secret Service got right and those they got wrong, and will identify corrective measures and additional resources that can be considered. However, it also poses some difficult questions for all of us on issues, like the use of lethal force and our tolerance for additional fortifications around the White House complex. Those questions do not have easy answers, and the long-term potential consequences must be thought through. Let us also be mindful that while our analysis of actions and shortcomings has the benefit of days of hindsight and consideration, anyone who has served on a protective detail knows the decision-making in an actual event with life and death consequences is measured in milliseconds. Those who were on duty during this incident had a much harder job in trying to get it right than we do here today. My perspective is one that is shaped by a career of over 30 years in the Secret Service, but also from my experiences at the head of 3 other operational components within the Department of Homeland Security, and now from 5 years in the private sector, where I remain deeply involved in the Homeland Security issues and the implementation of international best practices as it relates to the protection of individuals and high-value assets. I had the honor of joining the Secret Service in 1971, and I enjoyed a challenging and very interesting career, including being on protective details of Henry Kissinger, Vice President Bush, Quayle, Gore, and countless foreign heads of state and foreign dignitaries. Later, President Clinton appointed me as the Director of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and eventually I returned to Washington after the September 11th attacks to help start up the Transportation Security Administration. I rejoined the Secret Service in 2003 when I was appointed Director, where I was honored to serve for over 3 years. I subsequently was appointed by President Bush to serve as the Commissioner of the United States Customs and Border Protection, the largest law enforcement agency in the United States. I remained in that position into the Obama administration at the request of Secretary Napolitano. Upon retiring from the government in 2009, I helped found a security company that works for private sector and government clients. Therefore, the viewpoint that I will share on the subject before the committee today is informed largely by my experience with the Secret Service, but with the benefit of having worked for and with many other elite security organizations around the world for almost 40 years. Let me commend the members of this committee for the time and interest you are showing on this subject, especially at this juncture when there are so many pressing security concerns to which our government must pay attention. It goes without saying that the recent incident with the individual jumping the White House fence, running across the North Lawn and making it inside the White House, is unprecedented and unacceptable. This is not just my view, but as the Director has stated, it is her view and other senior management of that agency, as well as the rank and file. Again, perspective is critically important in this incident. We could easily be sitting here today discussing why an Iraq veteran, possibly suffering through post-traumatic stress disorder, armed with only a pocket knife, was shot dead on the north lawn when the President and First Family were not on the property. At the Secret Service, some of the split-second decisions made during this latest incident will thoroughly be examined, procedures will be debated, training will be altered, and in the end, the Secret Service will learn valuable lessons, as they have been doing throughout their history, of protecting the President and his family. This is an agency which has never been reluctant to red team incidents, those of high consequences and those of less importance, to find opportunities for improvement in the way it conducts its business, the way it trains its people, and the tools it uses to accomplish its incredibly important mission. I can tell you that my confidence remains extremely high that this aspect of the service's culture remains as strong today as it has ever been. And I know that the agency will learn valuable lessons that it can apply immediately to improve security at the White House and in other settings. I would urge the committee to keep in mind that when examining any incidents that the broader context in which the Secret Service operates is not one which is valued on security alone. The service has to ensure that the President, other protectees, and facilities in which they work and live are safe and secure. But they do so in the context of important American values like freedom and openness, and in close coordination, cooperation, and almost always after negotiation with a myriad of other stakeholders and decision-makers who have diverse priorities, responsibilities, and viewpoints. And this dynamic is, in fact, more true when it comes to the area surrounding the White House complex than in any other. As much as I may have wished it when I was the Director, the Secret Service absolutely cannot unilaterally, when it comes to almost any security feature in and around the White House. Stakeholders with a voice included the government of the District of Columbia, as Ms. Norton would recognize, the National Park Service, White House Historical Society, GSA, and others who all provide input into any architectural changes and improvements, new infrastructure, or changes in appearance. A prime example of this is the closure of Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House to vehicular traffic, a security imperative for the service from the service's perspective for many years that was politically impossible until Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 made the impact of a vehicle-borne explosive could have on a government building. No less, a 200-year-old sandstone mansion made it very vivid and undeniable. Even then, it was not until 2004, when I was Director, that we were able to complete the project to permanently converting this portion of the road into a pedestrian mall. I might add, to this day, there are those who believe the avenue should be reopened, in spite of the overwhelming and irrefutable evidence of the extreme risk such a move would put the First Family and hundreds of employees who work there. I can also tell you that there have been numerous studies conducted over the years by the Secret Service and at the Secret Service's request to test and explore options to address vulnerabilities of concern at the White House complex, motivated in part by concerns about the inadequacy of the current White House fence as an outer perimeter for a complex, given the ability of an individual or group of individuals to quickly scale it and be on the White House grounds. While notable improvements have been made, especially over the last decade, to the security of the White House complex, many unnoticeable to the public, there have been several priority improvements desired by the service that have not been possible in light of other considerations or given the level of funding provided to the agency for such capital improvements. Let me be clear. I am not in any way trivializing the importance of these other considerations. As a security professional, there are almost always being things that I would like to do for security purposes, but could not given the factors and limited funding. And that is always going to be the case. We must always keep in mind that the White House, like the United States Capitol, is an important symbol for the American people. It is obviously critically important that it be kept safe, but that security must be accomplished in a way that does not jeopardize the very values that we seek to protect and that these buildings themselves indeed symbolize. I ask that you keep this in context when looking at this particular incident and examining how something could have happened or how it could be and should be prevented in the future. Finally, I want to make sure that the committee is aware of another fundamental principle on which the Secret Service, in fact any good security organization, protective methodology is based. In the military, it's called defense in depth, but in law enforcement, it is usually referred to as multi-layered security. When it comes to protecting the President or the White House complex, there are many layers of protection through which an attacker must travel in order to achieve their desired objectives and to pose an ultimate threat to the person or thing that is the target. A breach of the fence and the entry of an individual into the White House is undeniably unacceptable.
Could you summarize? You're at twice 5 minutes.
Okay, I apologize. Then, having said that, Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Kyle.
Thank you, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members of the committee for inviting me to testify today regarding the U.S. Secret Service's security protocols. I believe I can offer a unique perspective on protecting high-visibility, targeted facilities after spending nearly 23 years as a special agent with the U.S. Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service, with responsibility for developing and implementing security programs for U.S. personnel, embassies, consulates, and other official facilities around the world. I've also spent numerous years in the private sector working in and advising corporate security operations and management. Additionally, from late 2009 until early 2012, I was the Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Protection at the Department of Homeland Security. As the Assistant Secretary, I was responsible for public-private partnerships and a regulatory program to protect the critical assets of the United States. Last year, I was also selected and served on the Benghazi Accountability Review Board recommended independent panel on best practices, which was established to identify best practices from across U.S. government agencies, the private sector, non-governmental organizations, and allied countries on management and operations in high-threat, high-risk locations globally. Mr. Chairman, the United States Secret Service has a proud history of almost 150 years protecting the most important government leaders of our country, the White House, and other official facilities, and conducting criminal investigations to ensure the integrity of our currency, banking systems, and financial communications and cybersecurity. The men and women of the Secret Service are on the front line every day, keeping our nation safe, and they do a tremendous job. The agents and officers of the Secret Service are constantly in the spotlight, especially serving at the White House, one of the most prominent symbols of our nation's strength and democracy, and we owe them a debt of gratitude for their service to our country. However, every organization, even those with a century and a half of history, must be willing to learn. Those who wish to do us harm, from an unpredictable, lone, possibly mentally unstable person, to an organized terror group intent on unleashing a calculated attack, typically have the element of surprise. Our country today faces a very dynamic, fluid, and evolving threat environment in which the aggressors have become very patient, resilient, and determined. We have to be better than they are. To counter this threat, security, intelligence, and law enforcement agencies like the Secret Service must have solid strategic and tactical management and leadership, focus on their primary mission, and provide their people with the best training and resources, and possibly most important, be ready to act aggressively and appropriately when faced with a threat. The Secret Service, like any successful organization, must be willing to continuously evolve and improve to adapt the agency ahead of the threat curve. Throughout my career, I found that government agencies and private sector organizations who are at the top of their game become complacent. Time tends to unknowingly erode and blunt the pointy end of the spear, and organizations and their management teams rely on, this is the way we've always done it, or we know how to do it best, so they're unwilling or unable to change. The Secret Service, I believe, would benefit from expanded use of new and emerging technologies to assist with its protective security responsibilities. In fact, when I was at the Department of Homeland Security, the Secret Service partnered with my office and the DHS Office of Science and Technology to research and develop cutting-edge technology for use at major events in the United States. Now is the time for the Department of Homeland Security to bring some of those technological enhancements out of the lab and expand their use in the Secret Service toolkit. In addition to emerging technology, management and leadership of an organization must adapt, change, and improve policies and procedures and deployment of personnel and resources should be under constant scrutiny and exercised based on real-world scenarios. The officers and agents of the Secret Service are some of the best this country has to offer, and they deserve the strategic and tactical leadership to match. All too often, Mr. Chairman, after something has gone wrong, the cry is simply for more money, more personnel, and a larger physical setback. This is rarely the correct answer. Absent a comprehensive understanding of the fundamental issues that led to systematic failures, throwing more money and people at the problem will only exacerbate existing management weaknesses and compound and magnify rather than correct management challenges. Internal reviews post-incident are typical in the U.S. government from agency to agency, but from my experience, these reviews are impacted by intentional or unintentional personal and professional bias and are often informed by the same agency cultural and management gaps that may have been a contributing factor in the original incident. The Department of Homeland Security and the Secret Service now have a unique opportunity and critical moment in time to obtain an unbiased, independent, top-to-bottom review focusing on the service's management and policies and procedures related to the incident on September 19th and other similar incidents. I strongly recommend that the Secretary of Homeland Security appoint a panel of external, independent experts to conduct this review, and this group should be tasked with providing advice, guidance, and formal recommendations to DHS and the Secret Service. In fact, Mr. Chairman, the panel I was on Benghazi was chaired by former Secret Service Director Mark Sullivan. Mr. Chairman, throughout my career, I have always been proud to work side by side with my Secret Service colleagues at every level in the agency. The United States Secret Service is a recognized world-class organization, and I am confident they will learn from this most recent and related incidents and innovate, strengthen, and improve as they keep our country and leaders safe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kyle. I'll recognize myself now. And I think the first question, if you can put out the map of the White House up there. The first question, Director, if you look at the lower portion, the first question the American people want to know was, is there a crash button, and had it been pushed, would it have locked the front door, what's marked as the entrance hall?
The front door at the time did not have an automatic locking mechanism. It required an individual to hand lock the door.
Okay. So we have an automated system that can lock down the White House. $800 million a year, millions of dollars more during your tenure each year than the President's request, and that door was unlocked with no one standing at it when Mr. Gonzales came through it. Is that correct?
The door was unlocked at the time of Mr. Gonzales' entry. That's correct.
Okay. And earlier there was a report and in the indictment of Mr. Gonzales that he was apprehended at the entrance hall. Isn't it true today that we understand that is not true? He was actually apprehended at the green room. Is that correct?
If I may clarify my first answer, the front door actually consists of two doors. There's an outer door, which is a glass, almost described as a storm door, and an inner door, which would be a wood, ornamental, historic door. The outer door, the glass storm door, was not locked. The internal wood door was in the process of being hand-locked.
Okay. Bottom line is, automated locking is a capability within the White House, but not at that entrance at that time.
Not at that time, but it has since been installed and is effective today.
We learn from our mistakes. The second question, your agency previously had reported, and an indictment against Mr. Gonzales asserted that he was arrested in that entry area. Isn't it true that he actually penetrated the cross hall, the east room, and in fact was arrested in the vicinity of the green room?
Referring to your map on the wall,
yes.
As I have been briefed, Mr. Gonzales entered the front double doors.
Ma'am, I want a short answer. I have very little time. Was he in fact, the Federal complaint said he was yes, in fact apprehended in one place. Isn't it true he was apprehended further into the White House?
As Mr. Gonzales entered the door, he knocked back the officer that was standing at the doorway. The officer then engaged Mr. Gonzales. They crossed the east entrance hall together. made the left turn down the cross hall. They stepped momentarily into the East Room. Another officer rendered aid, and he was placed on the ground, on the carpet, and handcuffed on the cross hall just outside of the green room. There is
Okay.
no indication
So in
at this
fact,
time.
the Federal complaint and the earlier reports were not accurate. Is that correct? Yes or no, please?
I think the original complaint is accurate that Mr. Gonzalez scaled the fence.
Ma'am,
And
ma'am,
entered-
hold it, hold it. I have very little time, and I'm not, the American people want to know if is the President safe. I want to know if we can rely on reports from your agency. Now, going back to Mr. Hernandez, during your watch, not as Director, but as Chief of Staff to the Director, is it true that, in fact, as reported, agents falsely assumed that they were not gunshots when they were gunshots, that, in fact, there were stand-down orders to people who had already pulled shotguns out, that, in fact, the bullets were not discovered to have hit the White House in real time within a 24-hour or greater period by the Secret Service? Yes or no, please?
Mr. Chairman, you're referring to the Ortega shooting that occurred
Yes.
in November
Ortega
11th,
Hernandez, if I remember.
2011.
Yes.
At that time, it is my understanding that there was reports of shots being fired in proximity to Constitution Avenue.
Ma'am, ma'am,
by the
no,
United States
stop,
Secret
please.
Service.
I want to be considerate to you. You have a hard job, but you head an agency whose morale has gone down. It is lower than other comparable Federal agencies. It has had a series of embarrassments. We're going to leave the embarrassments out. We've had 2 cases in which the reporting is evolving. Only last night did the public learn that, in fact, it was far worse, or at least somewhat worse, on September 19th. Only recently has it been revealed, and you said you wanted to correct the record. The Washington Post makes it clear, from what I read, that, in fact, on November 11th of 2011, shots were fired, the assailant left. Well, in fact, the Secret Service supervisor shut down the response of people who believed rightfully there had been shots fired. And, in fact, the follow-up did not discover the damage to the White House and the actual shots in real time. Additionally, Mr. Ortega Hernandez is the way I have it written, would not have been apprehended except that he had a car accident. And even when he was, it was not immediately linked to his criminal activity. That, in fact, the system at the White House did not detect the actual shots fired and begin the pursuit of somebody who had provided lethal force against the facility of the White House. Is that correct? You were Chief of Staff at the time. Is that roughly correct? And if it isn't, I'd allow you whatever time you need to properly explain what really happened on November 11th, 2011, so the American people can understand that September 19th is not the first time there has been considerable lapse, as I see it, and, in fact, during a long period of time, during your Chief of Staff time, now during your Director time, we have had the kinds of things that we should be concerned about for protecting the President. So please tell us, in whatever time you need, about November 11th, 2011, where the Washington Post is right or wrong. This is your chance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you're aware, my assignment as Chief of Staff
Could you get the microphone a little closer, please?
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. As you're aware, in 2008, my assignment with the United States Secret Service was Chief of Staff. My primary responsibilities at that time were business transformation and IT transformation for the organization. My focus was on the business operations of the organization. To my knowledge, and based on the briefings that I have received of this 3-year-old investigation that occurred in November of 2011 that appeared in the Washington Post on Sunday, I'd also been aware that Representative Chaffetz had asked for a data inquiry, and we responded back to the committee on September 12th and provided him detailed information of the Secret Service's activities on that weekend. Shots were reported by the United States Secret Service officers in the area of Constitution Avenue and 15th. There were witness accounts of a black vehicle that had fired shots. There was confusion at the time by the part of the witnesses as to what they had witnessed and what they had saw. Several of those witnesses put out Twitter accounts of what they had witnessed. They were subsequently located and interviewed and recanted those statements. The actual shots that were fired in proximity to Constitution Avenue and 16th, the vehicle sped away and went westbound on Constitution, erratically driving, and struck a light post in the area of 23rd and Constitution. Mr. Ortega then fled the vehicle. Park police officers and uniform division officers ultimately responded to the scene where the vehicle was left with the AK-47 in the front seat. Park police has jurisdiction over the traffic accident and assumed responsibility for the initial phases of the investigation.
Ma'am, I'm going to give you all the time you need, and I thank the ranking member. But the answer is, where are the inconsistencies with what we now know from the Washington Post? You said that they got the story wrong, they were misstating it, they were mischaracterizing it. I'd like to hear the inconsistencies. So far, you're just corroborating that, in fact, the understanding of the series of failures in real time to protect the White House are, in fact, correct, according to the Washington Post. So please tell us where they're not correct, please.
Throughout the course of this, there was a command post established down at Constitution Avenue and 23rd Street. Metropolitan Police Department, the U.S. Park Police, the United States Secret Service were there attempting to resolve or understand from the witness accounts what had happened along Constitution Avenue. Back at the White House, individuals had heard what they believed to be shots. The Secret Service, according to the records that I have been able to locate on this 3-year-old investigation, did respond properly. The emergency response teams and other officers did a protective sweep of the area to make sure that we did not have any intruders, to make sure that there were not injuries and obvious signs of anything that had been damaged. Further investigation with the Park Police, they were unable to resolve at that time as to whether or not these were shots being fired at other vehicles or shots being fired at the White House. That took some time to understand. It wasn't until the Usher's office was preparing for the return of the President and First Family, or the President and the First Lady, that they identified damage on the Truman balcony. That led to further investigation, and that led to us contacting the Federal Bureau of Investigation to initiate their full investigation.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings, I want to thank you for your understanding and just relate something that you and I discussed yesterday, if I may. In Washington, D.C. and around the country, there are a number of systems that we all know, and Baltimore, I believe, has it too, that they're basically microphones that hear gunshots, can identify the direction, can quickly, without human intervention, figure out whether or not a real shot has been fired, confirm it, and often give a very accurate direction. That type of technology isn't so odd that we don't see it in our cities. And I think that's the reason I went on so long with this question. Ms. Norton, I know, knows this. The district does have a sophisticated system, and I think the committee is going to want to make sure that not only does the White House have a higher level of awareness of this system, but that the district system be enhanced, if necessary, to make sure that something like this never happens again. And I thank the gentleman for his patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director Pearson, I have thought about all of this long and hard. And I think my major concern goes to the culture. It is very disturbing to know that Secret Service agents in the most elite protective agency in the world feel more comfortable, apparently, from what I'm hearing, coming to members of this committee and telling things than coming to you and members in the agency. That I'm telling you, when I boil all of this down, that to me is dangerous. It has to go against morale. I don't even see how good decisions can be made if your own people don't feel a level of comfort that, or they feel fear that they are going to be able to talk about the things that concern them. And I just want to go through some questions, and I want to give you a chance to address that, because to me, that when all the dust settles, that's a problem. And so going back to this November 11th, 2011 incident, and I know you were not the director. I understand that. A lot of people talk about the cultural problem with the Secret Service, and the press reports, of all the press reports, the one that was concerned me is that back down in 2011, and it said, I quote one of the officers who were on the scene who thought gunfire had probably hit the house that night were largely ignored. And some were afraid to dispute their boss's conclusions. Did you see that report, and are you aware of this issue?
Ranking Member Cummings, I too read that newspaper article and was troubled by those accounts. I have asked my Office of Professional Responsibility to retrieve the file and those records, what we know and when we knew it, if this young officer had made such a statement. I did find a statement where this young officer alleges that they were reluctant to report it to their supervisor to be criticized, I believe was a statement. That troubles me as well.
And that's a major problem.
I'm going to ask my Office of Professional Responsibility to re-interview that officer. They remain on the job today to determine whether or not that officer would be more confident today, or what were some of the problems that night that she felt like she could not say that. That extremely troubles me. Now,
it said that she heard shots, and I quote, she heard shots and what she thought was debris falling overhead. She drew her handgun and took cover, then heard a radio call reporting possible shots fired near the south grounds. She then called the Secret Service Joint Operations Center to report that she was breaking into the gun box near her post, pulling out a shotgun. According to this article, and I quote, she replaced the buckshot inside with a more powerful slug in case she needed to engage an attacker. But then the call came over the radio to stand down. The next day, the officer, and I quote, listened during roll call before her shift Saturday afternoon as supervisors explained that the gunshots were from people in two cars shooting at each other. The report said that she, and I quote, had told several senior officers Friday night that she thought the house had been hit. But on Saturday, she did not challenge her supervisors for fear of being criticized, she later told investigators. Now, Director Pearson, as a former field agent and as the head of the agency, that has to concern you tremendously. Is that right?
yes, sir, it does. It's unacceptable.
Does it trouble you that some of your own agents apparently do not feel comfortable raising security concerns? And this is just one person. And there are others who, again, would rather be whistleblowers. And again, I have no problem with whistleblowers. Matter of fact, we do everything in our power to protect them. But this agency, if they'd rather be a whistleblower than to bring their concerns to you, you started off by saying that you're going to make sure this never happens again. Let me tell you what the problem is here. If you're heading an agency where the folks are not providing you with the information to do the right thing, to make the changes, how do you even know what the problems are? You follow me? Help me with this.
Yes, sir, if I may. Anytime any organization, you start to make significant changes, some people will have resistance. Some will push back. However, I will continue to lead and transform the Secret Service to ensure that we're prepared for our mission and ensure that we can restore our reputation to the American public. What I will tell you, over the last 18 months I've been serving as director, and over the last 6 months I have met personally with over 1,500 of our supervisors and employees. I've had a number of engagement sessions and spent over an hour with each of them advising them of what my expectations are, what their performance requirements are, what personal accountability is, how to manage this workforce, how to ensure that we are performing at the highest levels in everything that we do, that we're operationally ready, that we're training, that we're evaluating each other, and that we're constantly looking at our mission to make sure we're being effective in everything we do. I can't speak for what has happened in the past, but I can tell you as we're moving forward into the future, and while I am as director, I will not tolerate in personnel missteps where people either fail to act or do not support the workforce or do not work in unison. But I would say that I suspect there are many people that are still pushing back, and I'm going to continue to lead forward.
You know, the problem is that that officer, she was right. And that was the morning after the shooting, yet it took 4 days for the housekeepers to discover that the bullets had struck the building. Isn't that right? In other words, the officer was right.
Yes, ultimately the officer was right.
The Washington Post story says that this agent subsequently reported her concerns to investigators. Was there an after-action report about the 2011 shooting? Did it include recommendations relating to agents reporting their concerns without fear of being criticized? Do you know?
I don't know, but I would say that the officer's statement to our interviews that occurred with Secret Service employees are different than the officer's statement to the FBI and the investigators conducting the investigation. And that is why I've asked my Office of Professional Responsibility to go back and have a robust conversation with that employee to ensure that she feels supported, knows that we want her to come forward with any information, and that we understand what some of the impediments may be with the management team where we feel like we can make improvements to ensure that never happens again.
Let me say this, and then I'll close. Former Director Sullivan invited me a few years ago, you may have been there, to speak before your top agents after the Columbia situation with the prostitutes. And one of the things that I said to them back then, I expressed my tremendous respect and appreciation, but I also told them that I don't want anyone to imagining that they can pierce the protective veil of the Secret Service, period. Because I firmly believe that the reputation is so very, 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 very important. And, you know, again, that culture thing is an issue. I'm sure others will question you about that. But I just thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you, and I'll recognize myself. Following up on Ranking Member Cummings, I sent you a letter, Director, specifically asking for details about the situation on 2011. I'd ask unanimous consent to enter it into the record so all members can see it. The unclassified spot report on the incidents in November of 2011. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Director, why is it that when I look at this report, there isn't even a mention of Officer Carrie Johnson, and yet the Washington Post reports details about her calling into the Secret Service headquarters? Why isn't her name even mentioned in the spot report?
The spot report reflects the active investigation. I don't know what information that you have relative to Officer Johnson's reporting.
Well, You gave us this report. I asked you for all the details and information. This is minute by minute, 2052 hours, 2053. It's minute by minute what happened in this situation. Are you telling me that the Washington Post is wrong, that she didn't call into the headquarters? Did she not do that?
I'm confused by your statement about call into headquarters.
Well, according to the Washington Post, she called in and reported that she had heard shots fired. She reported that she was opening a box, getting out a shotgun, all those details.
That's the confusion that I have with the Washington Post article. Typically, when there is an emergency happening around the White House or alerts are made, much like the shots being fired on November 11th, I would expect officers to react according to their security protocols.
And she says in the Washington Post, it says that she called into the headquarters. There's no mention of that. Other officers are mentioned in there, but she's not off. We will follow up on that. It's unacceptable to not even mention the actions that she took, and that the Washington Post could get that, but the Congress couldn't, and you couldn't provide it. Let's go back to the fence jumping situation. State police, the fence jumper. State police had detained a person, had a map in the car, all the weapons that Congressman Cummings had talked about, suspicious behavior. My understanding is that actually 3 officers had actually spotted him that day and not reported it. Not reported it. And I want to know if that's true as we go along. The fence failed. Officers chased him, didn't catch him. Sniper was in position. No shots were fired. Dogs were out there, weren't released. Counter surveillance, I'm understanding, is understaffed. There was no shoot. Nobody shot anything. There was nobody that was intercepted. The doors were unlocked. An officer was overwhelmed. A crash box was evidently silenced. And yet the Secret Service puts out a statement that says they offered, quote, tremendous restraint and discipline, end quote. My question to you is, do those officers have your authority to use lethal force to prevent somebody from entering the White House?
Those officers do have the authority to use independent judgment to leverage lethal force when appropriate.
Is that true when somebody's trying to get at the President?
That is always true. They are law enforcement officers.
So it's always true when there's somebody's trying to penetrate the White House that they can use lethal force?
As appropriate within the confines of the law.
Is somebody trying to explain the details of that? If somebody is approaching the White House, has penetrated the security and making a run for the White House, no apparent weapon, can they take that person down?
The law requires that law enforcement officers ensure that they are in imminent danger or others are in imminent danger before they can leverage lethal force.
So if the person's running at the White House but no apparent weapon, they can or cannot use lethal force?
Those are going to be independent decisions made by the officer based on the totality of the circumstances.
How does an officer know if they have an improvised explosive device or dirty bomb or if it's a terrorist? How do they know that? Shouldn't they assume that this person has ill intention?
Law enforcement officers are trained in observation skills, and I would assess that they are constantly looking at people for ill intentions.
I think it's confusing. This is part of what they have to deal with. They make a split-second decision. I want it to be crystal clear. You make a run and a dash to the White House, we're going to take you down. I want overwhelming force. Would you disagree with me?
I do want our officers and agents to execute appropriate force for anyone attempting to challenge or breach the White House.
We've got to explore this further. The Secret Service put out a statement, according to the talk to the Associated Press, I should say. They reported on September 20th at 1:24 a.m. Eastern Time. Donovan, the spokesperson, Ed Donovan, said the man appeared to be unarmed to officers who spotted him climbing the fence, and his search of the subject turned up no weapon. Why would he say that there's no weapon?
I will have to ask Mr. Donovan that question.
You haven't done that since the incident happened?
I know when Mr. Gonzalez was placed into custody, he was found to have a folded knife in his right front pants pocket.
Do you consider that a weapon?
That is a weapon.
Why would the Secret Service put out an official press release saying that, put out a statement to the Associated Press. Did you ever correct the Associated Press? Did you call them back and say, you got that wrong?
I have no knowledge of that.
So you just let it linger out there that there was no weapon. And that was wrong. It was inaccurate. Correct?
I do know that there has been a lot of information in this case, and that's why we are doing a robust review. I can't speak for conversations that I was not a part of or the press's interest in this.
Did you read the press release before it went out?
I have read the press release before it went out.
Do you agree that the officers showed tremendous restraint and discipline? You agreed with that comment?
I do think, based on the totality of the circumstances and from Mr. Gonzalez's arrest, that these officers did use restraint in making a very difficult decision as to whether to deploy lethal force or subdue and arrest him.
Do you think they responded appropriately?
I do not think the security plan was properly executed, and that is why I'm conducting a robust investigation to ensure that we have a comprehensive review of what people were, that I have the facts, all of the facts, so I can make an assessment of what the decisions were on that night.
Thank you. I've gone well past my time. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia. Pardon me. We're going to recognize Mr. Horsford. Is he here?
Good to go. All right.
Go ahead. We'll go to Ms. Norton. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Director Pearson for her 30 years of service in the Secret Service, for rising through the ranks to become the first woman director, and I am aware of what she has inherited and of her many accomplishments. Director Pearson, I want to ask you about the rumors that have been out there about what the Secret Service may do. When Pennsylvania Avenue was closed down after Oklahoma City, there was a kind of example of how public access can remain. I was heartbroken. Both sides of the White House were closed down. I worked with the Clinton administration to open E Street, the backside of the White House, that not only for its vista, but because it's a major thoroughfare and it affected the entire region. That was summarily closed down. But as Mr. Balsham testified, in front of the White House, though cars can no longer go there, people can go there. And essentially it was made a park, a walkway. And none of my constituents, no one says it should be reopened because that would mean cars, not people. So my concern is whether or not people will continue to have access around the White House. I walked to the White House yesterday. I was pleased to find not only tourists, but protesters, as usual, there. I ask you, I noticed that I followed your testimony, and you testified 16 jumpers in only 5 years. So there's been an increase in fence jumpers. And so I want to know whether you have considered before today simply asking that a higher fence be built, one that, for example, could curve, still be historic, that wrought iron fence, but with the curves going outwards, so maybe you damage one of your body parts if you try to get over it. Or even, and here, these are off the top of my head, multi-layered glass behind the fence that could resist blasts from guns or bombs. Since there have been 16 in 5 years, at least I think many more over the years, have you considered such common sense devices as that so that the public would still have access, but the President of the United States and his family would be protected? Have you ever recommended that?
Representative Norton, we do want to work in partnership to ensure that the people have access in proximity to the White House and the historic nature and the national significance of the Lafayette Park and Pennsylvania Avenue and in the White House. And so I do look forward to continuing to work with you and the administration and the Department to look at what additional security features can be put in place, not only for White House fence jumpers, but for the other challenges that face us in securing public areas.
I recognize that most of these fence jumpers are harmless. I am worried about multiple fence jumpers and whether you have the resources and the staff, if there were 5 or 6 of them, to come across the fence. By my calculations, you are down almost 300, more than 250 agents in the uniformed services in the last year or two since the sequester and the cuts. Is that the case?
Yes, Representative Norton. The Secret Service has had a reduction in its staffing as a result of sequestration and other fiscal constraints. We are close to 550 employees below our optimal level.
Do you have, do you have to, I understand that staff has had to be brought in from other units who may not have been as familiar with the White House because of the shortage of staff. Is that the case?
Earlier this summer, and based upon the work requirement that the Secret Service is faced with in the month of September in order to support the United Nations General Assembly, I made the decision to bring in special agents from around the country to support some of the Uniform Division posting assignments in proximity to the White House tours. That's provided some relief for our Uniform Division to be able to take some annual leave.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I realize my time is gone, but I do think that Congress has to take some responsibility when the sequester went across the board, including police agencies like the Secret Service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlewoman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I'm actually a big fan of law enforcement, and I don't take any delight in asking the questions I'm going to ask you, but law enforcement are given unique powers in our society, and with those unique powers come unique responsibilities, and I can't think of any responsibility greater than guarding the safety and security of our President and his family. So as I understand it, several agents believe that shots were fired, and a supervisor concluded that it was a vehicle backfiring. Even if that were true, given the very small investment of resources, why not investigate the shots fired?
Representative, I think that is where some of the confusion starts to come out, is the story that's in the Washington Post.
I'm not asking you about a Washington Post story. I'm asking you about why a housekeeper who doesn't go to Glencoe, who doesn't spend 14 weeks in training, who doesn't have 18 weeks of training thereafter, found glass, and your agents did not. That didn't come from the Washington Post. Is that true? Did a housekeeper find evidence of the shooting and your agents did not?
The housekeeper was able to locate fragments of glass on the Truman balcony, which is not an area that is frequented by security personnel.
And I didn't ask you about who is frequent. I asked you, there was a spontaneous conclusion that shots were fired. There were officers who believed they smelled gunpowder. Your officers drew their weapons, Director. That's how seriously they took it. So I'm not interested in cursory searches. When did your agency find evidence of the shooting?
I believe it was on the 15th or 14th of November.
Which was how many days after the shooting?
3 to 4 days later.
All right. So you have an officer contemporaneous with the shooting believing that shots were fired. You have officers taking cover because they believe shots were fired. You have officers at the White House drawing their weapons because they believe shots were fired. Now give me all the evidence to support a vehicle backfiring.
Representative, I am sure your familiarity with law enforcement in downtown areas, there is sound attenuation. Oftentimes,
I've never heard a car backfire 6 to 8 times, Director, ever. Have you?
I've heard car backfires, but I don't think
6 to 8 times.
I think it's undisputed that there were witnesses that observed shots being fired.
Right. And it is also undisputed that a housekeeper who doesn't train at Glencoe, who doesn't have 18 weeks of intensive training, found the evidence of the shooting, and your agency did not. And I'm going to give you credit because you didn't bring it up. It was brought up by a colleague. I have some colleagues who are just obsessed with sequestration. We can't have any hearing without it coming up. But you're not going to sit there and tell us that sequestration is the reason your agency did not find evidence of the shooting, are you?
No, I am not.
Okay. And I give you credit for that. And I was stunned that one of my colleagues would try to conflate, to use the Attorney General's word, sequestration with the fact that a law enforcement agency waited 4 or 5 days to find evidence of a shooting that a housekeeper found. So give me all the evidence to back the vehicle backfiring narrative, because we already know all the evidence to support the shooting. Give me all the evidence that made your department so sure that it was a vehicle backfiring that you didn't even search the White House.
The Secret Service was actively engaged with the United States Park Police in an effort to determine where and what direction the shots were fired on Constitution Avenue.
Madam Director, you reached the conclusion that it was a vehicle backfiring as opposed to shots fired. Now, this is the third time I've asked. Give me all the evidence to support that supervisor's conclusion that it was not shots fired, despite all the contemporaneous claims that it was, and despite all of the reaction of your agents that it was. Give me all the evidence to support the theory that it was a vehicle backfiring. And then tell me, why not invest the very minimal resources required to exhaustively search the White House?
Representative, oftentimes in these cases, there are a number of different people that make different statements. What I can tell you is that Uniform Division officers on Constitution Avenue heard gunfire and reported gunfire. I can't speak to the specificity of the individual you're talking about that reported it as—
Well, can you speak to why a housekeeper found it and your department did not?
Housekeepers routinely work in the private residence of the President and First Family.
So even when there is overwhelming, let's just say suspicion that shots were fired, we won't say overwhelming evidence because that would have required you to search the premises. Overwhelming suspicion of shots fired, and you don't go through every inch of that residence? I want you to imagine a prosecutor is in front of a jury, Madam Director, because this is where sometimes these cases wind up, and you explain to the jury why a housekeeper found evidence of the shooting and your agency did not.
Representative, again, this case has been prosecuted in Federal court, and those explanations were made before a Federal prosecutor.
And thank the Lord the explanations were sufficient for a jury. Now, I want you to make them sufficient for Congress.
The initial shooting incident occurred at 9:30 at night. It's difficult to see at night.
How about here?
Officers
Can you hear at night?
Officers heard the shots fired on Constitution Avenue. Officers reacted, picked up security positions, swept the area looking for any type of injury, any type of intruder. It was not known until days later that these shots had actually struck the upper level, the third floor level of the White House.
Okay, I'm going to end because I'm out of town with the same question that I began with. Why not search every inch of the White House, given the very small investment of resources? I mean, I went on your website, and I saw that you have training for psychology. You have training for survival skills, none of which I minimize, all of which I'm sure is very important. This is just processing a crime scene, Director. This is not high math. It is processing a crime scene. You actually don't need 18 weeks of training to be able to do that. You just need to walk around. So why wasn't it done?
It is my understanding that a perimeter sweep was done. Was it as thorough as it needed to be?
Evidently not. Evidently not.
Gentleman's time has expired. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, the ranking member of our subcommittee on national security, Mr. Tierney, for 7 minutes.
Thank you. Well, thank all the witnesses here this morning. Director, I want to talk a little bit about preventions. If we look back in July, several months before the incident where the perimeter was breached and Mr. Gonzalez went into the White House, It's our information that he was stopped by the Virginia State Police, and in his car they found at least 11 weapons and a map with a line drawn directly to the White House. Is that your understanding as well?
It was a regional map with a line pointed to the memorial area of the mall, including the White House and the other historic monuments.
And our reports are also that the Virginia State Police and the ATF then referred that matter to the Secret Service presumably because of that line. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So Secret Service, based on that, had an interview with Mr. Gonzales at that time. Is that also correct?
Yes, the case was later referred to the Secret Service for an interview of Mr. Gonzales.
Now, how thorough would that interview have been according to your protocols? How deep would they have gone into their examination of Mr. Gonzales and his history?
They had a very thorough initial interview with Mr. Gonzales and initiated contacts with his family members, his mental health history, and the police reports.
So they determined that he had a mental health history?
He acknowledged that he had a mental health history as a veteran suffering from PTSD.
And do your protocols allow you to then look at his records, to obtain his records, or is that not something you can do?
If the individual consents to the release of their medical records, we do pursue that. And in this case, Mr. Gonzales consented to the release of his military medical records.
So you had all of his medical records to review. I presume your agents did review them?
They were obtained over a period of time, and we have received them, and they have been reviewed.
And despite all of that, what happened? I mean, you didn't take any action. You didn't have him arrested. You didn't have him continue to be under observation, did you?
Representative, it's a very difficult thing for people dealing with disabilities and people dealing with mental illness when they don't exhibit any unusual direction of interest in our protectees. Mr. Gonzales, at the time, denied any interest or any intent to harm anyone. He indicated that his information relative to the map in his car was given to him by another individual who had recommended places in Washington, D.C. to sightsee, and that he intended to go to on camping trips and wanted to go to the Valley Forge, Pennsylvania area.
Was the individual whom you said gave him that map ever questioned?
Not to my knowledge.
How does that comport with your protocols and your procedures?
I know our investigators are as thorough as they possibly can be in investigations like this to make sure that we have a good understanding of Mr. Gonzales.
So your testimony the individual wasn't available for some reason?
I do not know the specifics of that, but I can get back with you.
I wish you would, because I think that would be an indication whether or not they really were as thorough as they should have been. All right. Now, notwithstanding that, there was a second incident before the perimeter was breached by Mr. Gonzales and he went into the White House, where he was found walking in front of the White House with a hatchet in his belt. Is that correct?
Mr. Gonzales was observed on August 25th on the south fence line.
And he was interviewed again by Secret Service agents?
He was interviewed by Uniform Division officers
of the Secret Service?
Of the Secret Service and special agents of the Secret Service.
And his name was run against a database?
Yes, his name was run against a database.
And the database basically indicated the earlier incident, right?
Yes, the database provided information of the original contact with Mr. Gonzales.
So at that time, they knew he had been arrested in Virginia, had a map pointing towards the area of the White House, had ammunition in his car, was now found outside the White House walking with a hatchet. We knew he had mental health problems. His records had been reviewed. What happened then?
Officers and agents made contact with Mr. Gonzales, asked him about the hatchet that he was carrying. He indicated that he had been camping in the area of Lake Prince William County down around Quantico. The agents and officers had asked him for a consent search of his vehicle. He agreed and was going to return the hatchet to the vehicle. They went back. They looked through the vehicle. Mr. Gonzales was extremely cooperative, dispelled any concerns that the officers had. He had camping gear and camping equipment in his car. He appeared to be living out of his car.
And so they just let him go?
Mr. Gonzales had not violated any laws, and he had to be released.
Did they have any follow-up? Did anybody talk to any other agencies in the Washington area about observing this individual or making sure that somebody knew what his behavior was after that second incident?
That